because it is time for Daniel and the Deacon's Den. Good morning to you, Deacon Dan Brahier. Can't wait to hear about a recent retreat that you went on.
Good morning, Ron and Dave. Yes, I was on a retreat, and it changes a lot of things. It kind of changes your whole perspective, I think. You know, as deacons, canon law requires that we have a retreat every year, and then particular law, which is the diocesan law, says that a deacon has to have at least 3 days a year of retreat.
Wow.
And so the parishes are expected to help kind of pay for that experience. We don't get paid for our ministry, of course, but they help us out with being able to do continuing formation in our retreats. So the retreats that I take every year are a little different from most people's. I generally take a 5-day silent retreat. I go down to the Trappist monastery of the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. And yeah, it's silent. The only talking I do all week is praying the Liturgy of the Hours with the community and maybe a couple of short conversations with the monks at the front desk, but it's really all about the silence and the stillness. I'm reminded of a story that the Desert Fathers back in the 3rd century used to tell. And they would talk about these 3 friends decided they wanted to become saints, and they weren't afraid to put in the work that was necessary to do it. So the first one chose to spend his life reconciling enemies, and the second chose to work with the sick, and the third went into the desert to live in silence and prayer. But in spite of all of the hard work, the first guy could not make peace in the world, so he decided to find the one who was serving the sick. But when he meets up with him, he found his friend discouraged and overworked as well. So they decided to seek out their third friend who was dwelling in the desert. They found him living peacefully and in enjoying himself, and they asked him to tell them what had gone wrong with their efforts. So he pours some water into a bowl, and he says to him, "Bring me some mud." So they go outside of the cell, and they throw a handful of mud in. And he says, what do you see? And they say, "Well, we see a bowl of muddy water." So he waits a bit, and he says, "Now what do you see?" And they said, "Well, it still looks like a bowl of muddy water." So he says, "Well, give it time." And he goes off to bed, and he leaves them staring into that bowl of mud. And the next morning, when the sun had risen, he returns and says, "Now what do you see?" And they said, "Well, we see our reflection in the water." And the monk says, "Yeah, it's the same for those who are living among noise and distraction in the world. A man must first be still enough to see himself clearly, and only then can he be of service to other people."
Wow.
So that's, isn't that amazing? So that's really what the retreat is all about. It's taking the time to be still enough to go inside and see ourselves, improve our relationship with God, so that we then have something to give on the outside. And so a silent retreat, which I'll admit is not for everybody. Some people like going to a retreat like Christ Who Knows His Parish or an Acts or something that has, presentations and witness talks and discussions and so forth. My preference is to just go get alone, and be in the silence. And so what I do is allow the Liturgy of the Hours to kind of frame the day. The monks get together in the church 7 times a day to pray the hours from between 3:15 in the morning and 7:45 in the evening. And then in between those, I'll take hikes, pray the rosary, do spiritual reading, and just rest. So my spiritual reading I was doing this year, I'm still working on St. Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle. I'm just about done with it. I thought I'd finished on a retreat, but I didn't quite finish it. I'm reading Thomas Merton's collection of letters that he wrote called The School of Charity, which I found very interesting. And then I was reading the first book of Samuel. Have you guys been watching at all or seen the program called House of David?
Yes, I loved House of David. Yeah, I can't wait for the next
good
season. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. That show is to David, as the chosen is to Jesus.
Yeah.
But what an incredible program. So one of the things that I had was a curiosity of how much of that is actually in the Bible and how much of it is Hollywood.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm not as familiar with Samuel, the books, as I am with the New Testament. So I was very carefully reading it to see historically whether all of this stuff, and it really is amazing how much it matches up. There's stuff first book of Samuel, I went, gee, I didn't even realize that was in there, but yeah, that's in the movie, So, but while reading and praying, take a lot of notes, write dozens of pages of notes in journal pages. Ironically, I always do that so I can revisit it later to see what I was thinking, but I never get around to reading
Right.
it. So, the first night at orientation, Father Carlos, who is one of the monks, the guest master, he gives a real short just introduction to make sure that everybody's oriented. And he says to the group, this retreat is not a time for catching up with friends. It's not a time for making checklists. It's not a time for setting goals or getting any kind of work done. This is strictly 5 days to spend alone with God, period. And I thought to myself, I spend 360 days a year in the world, with family, work, and ministry. These are the 5 days set aside just to listen to God. And the monks always say that God speaks the language of silence, and you have to quiet yourself enough for that mud to settle so you can actually see the reflection. So it was really a beautiful week, and I'm a firm believer that you can't give what you don't have. So, unless a deacon actually takes the time to rest and get his relationship with God right, he won't have anything left when he tries to help couples prepare for marriage or baptisms or teach OCIA or preach or visit the sick, talk on the radio, whatever it is. You got to have that rest. So I literally put a countdown calendar on my phone every year, and I count the days until the next retreat. It's kind of like that light at the end of the tunnel that not only feeds me, but it gives me something to look forward to in the coming year too. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, I love a silent retreat. I know the Ignatian retreats are silent. There's of course presentations, conference talks, and then silence after that, really for the whole weekend. So you just reflect on what you just heard. So, but there is something about that interior silence and it does take a while. I'm glad you had 5 days because you can't really do it in 2.5 days like over a weekend.
Oh, for sure. In fact, you have an option at Gethsemane Abbey of either taking a retreat Monday through Friday, 5 days, or Friday through Monday, which is effectively 3 days or 4 days. And one time I tried the weekend retreat. It wasn't long enough because I realized that when I get down there, on Monday, it takes me all day and into Tuesday just to quiet myself and get into retreating mode, and by Tuesday evening into Wednesday and Thursday, I'm actually retreating. So, and by Friday, I'm, closing up shop and coming home. So even though you're gone for 5 days, I'm really only intensely feeling retreating about 2.5 of those days. But it definitely takes time to slow down. We're so busy in this world, we don't even realize it. And once you slow down like that, you realize just how tired and in some cases kind of burned out you are and need to reconnect with God.
Yeah, that was my curiosity because you've taken enough of these to kind of measure how long it takes you to quiet. And look, it's the same for all of us. When we go on vacation, it takes us a couple of days to get in vacation mode. When we come back from vacation, it takes us a couple of days, for me, a couple months, to get back into work mode. But no, I mean, to take all of the chaos and all the things going on in the world, it's not surprising at all. It takes 36 hours or more just to begin to quiet yourself.
Yeah, and I kind of have it down because I've been doing this form of a retreat for so long. I do have it kind of down to an art in terms of how I do each of the days and the rhythm I go through. And I considered this year doing a full week retreat because with special permission, you can do kind of like a Friday to Friday. But I ended up abandoning that plan just for that reason, that I have such success with the 5-day model. Right. I didn't want to mess with it, but there's no question you have to slow down, and then you have to bring yourself back up again too. So that when you get back in the car and you're driving back home the 340 miles and you stop in to get a pop, and there's people talking and it's like,
Yeah, right.
I'm so used to not saying anything to anybody. Like any word that anybody speaks is going to set me right off.
That's so funny. But what wisdom from the church and from our diocese as well to regulate that, to say, look, this is not an option. In order to do what we're calling you to do, you've got to have this time alone.
Yeah, we have it such a high priority, for our deacons specifically, to get the retreat, and also to do continuing formation, to go to conferences and workshops and take an online class or whatever. But we monitor that. So that's one of the things that I do as a delegate for permanent deacons is I have a list of, all of our active deacons, and any time that someone makes a retreat, they submit the days where they went and what they did and so forth, and I keep track of that. And the same thing for continuing formation hours. They take a workshop or a class or whatever, and we keep track of that to make sure that everybody is doing that. Not Big Brother looking over your shoulder, but just as kind of a way of saying, hey, we are accountable in our ministry to making sure we're continuing our growth in our faith life, in our education, so we're giving our best to our parishioners.
Yeah, as any father would do. I mean, leading the deacons has a fatherly aspect to it, right? So looking out for those under your charge. Love it.
Deacon Dan Brahier, thanks so much. Love it. And thanks for sharing that retreat experience. I'm going to be silent the rest of the show, Dave.
That's not going to work, Mr. Finn. Thank you, Deacon Dan.
You're welcome. Have a great week.